Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Lamberg. I'm the acting counterterrorism coordinator for the U.S. Department of State. I want to welcome everybody to this really great event. We have two excellent panels. And I want to remind everybody this is a hybrid meeting, so we have an online group calling in, and we appreciate them doing so. And it's also going to be simultaneously interpreted. And so we have hopefully a really good opportunity to talk about some important issues. I want to welcome all of you here and online for joining us to discuss the humanitarian and security crisis in the detention facilities in Al Hol and Roj displaced person camps in Northeast Syria. All those who will speak today have worked hard to raise awareness of the many concerns we have in Northeast Syria. Now is the time for all of our member states to act, and we call on all member states that still have nationals in Northeast Syria to take responsibility for the nationals by repatriating, rehabilitating, reintegrating, and when appropriate, prosecuting those who remain in Northeast Syria. This is one of the most pressing humanitarian and counterterrorism challenges we have in the international community anywhere in the world. And I expect today's discussion will be clear-eyed about the stakes and the predicament we face in that region. So with that, I would like to introduce the structure of the event and our opening panel speakers. We're going to have an opening panel for the first half of the event, including remarks from Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, Ambassador Richard Verma. Following Deputy Secretary Verma, Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister for the Government of Iraq, Fuad Hussein, will speak on Iraq's impressive efforts and critical contributions with regards to repatriations from Northeast Syria. Following Foreign Minister Hussein, UN Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms while Countering Terrorism, Fionnuala Ní Allain, and UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Ted Chaiban will share their experiences. So before we start with the panel, I want to note that we're going to have a second panel following that will focus on the repatriation effort from a legal, humanitarian, and firsthand perspective. And my colleague over here, Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Ian Moss, along with Executive Secretary for the IIJ, Stephen Hill, both seated here. They're going to lead that panel. So with that, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to pass the floor over to Deputy Secretary of State, Richard Verma.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Chris, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you and your team do each day. Thank you for all being here. It's a really, really important event. I'd like to acknowledge our guest speakers and fellow panelists as well. The Foreign Minister, thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. Our UN Special Rapporteur and the UNICEF Deputy Executive Director. It's great to be able to be here with all of you. Earlier this summer in Riyadh at the de-ISIS Ministerial, Secretary Blinken emphasized that our shared progress in defeating ISIS was a testament to the strength of our shared purpose and the courage of our partners on the ground. Together, we've achieved the territorial defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, prevented large-scale attacks, and invested billions to stabilize and rebuild the region. But the Secretary reiterated that our work is not yet done, and that addressing the intertwined humanitarian, security, and human rights crises in Northeast Syrian detention centers and Al Hol and Roj camps, including via repatriations, is critical to preventing the reemergence of ISIS. And the need is acute. Roughly 50,000 displaced people, mostly women and children, remain at Roj and Al Hol. Half are under the age of 12. That means there are nearly 25,000 kids who have known no other existence and urgently need a second chance at life outside of these camps. On top of that, thousands of ISIS detainees remain in detention facilities, of whom approximately 2,000 are from countries other than Iraq and Syria. So the challenge is immense. But in recent months, we have made progress. Just in 2023, 23 countries, including Iraq, France, Netherlands, Spain, and Germany, have repatriated nearly 4,000 people. and we expect several more will do so before the end of this calendar year. Last year, more third country nationals were repatriated from Northeast Syria than in the previous 2 years combined. And in the past month, the United States has supported repatriations of over 1,000 individuals out of al-Hol. I want to be sure to highlight the commitment Iraq has shown in bringing home its nationals safely and securely, repatriating approximately 6,200 Iraqi refugees from camps in Northeast Syria since May 2021, including 635 more announced this week. Iraq has demonstrated it is sincere in its desire to repatriate its nationals out of Syria, and the United States stands ready to assist Iraq as it continues and works to accelerate the return of Iraqi nationals. While it is critical that all countries safely repatriate nationals from Northeast Syria, our Iraqi partners carry the largest burden. Roughly a third of the detainees and half of displaced persons are Iraqi. We know these repatriations are only the beginning. We have to ensure that those who return are rehabilitated and reintegrated, and as Chris said, or if appropriate, prosecuted. We support the government of Iraq in its efforts to accelerate departures of the returnees from Jeddah 1 camp in Iraq to their communities of origin, as well as to ensure unfettered access for the humanitarian actors supporting the population, some of whom are listening here today. This won't always be smooth or simple, in fact, far from it. But working together, including with the UN, our international partners, and civil society, we can meet these challenges head on. Indeed, we are eager to work with colleagues from across the UN, members of the De-ISIS Coalition, the ICRC, and other relevant organizations on these urgent issues. We look forward to how we can more deeply collaborate with UNICEF, led by the Deputy Executive Director, to facilitate the repatriations of young people and address the situation faced by children in Northeast Syria. We are pleased to see ICRC designate a special coordinator for Northeast Syria, Marian Gasser, who will speak later today. Together, we must make it clear we need more international access to these camps to ensure the right experts are on the ground to address the long-term challenge this crisis presents. And repatriation is a crucial component of solving this crisis, but it is only part of the solution. We also need to keep working to improve conditions in the camps and detention centers. The United States has helped improve conditions in al-Hol and Roj and youth rehabilitation centers and in detention facilities through the provision of humanitarian and stabilization assistance and efforts to improve security inside the camps as well. In June, Secretary Blinken announced that the United States committed $148.7 million to the Stabilization Pledge Drive to meet critical needs that Syrians and Iraqis themselves have identified, from essential services and education to community reintegration and accountability for crimes. We are grateful for the contributions of our allies and partners as well, but there is much more to be done. And that brings us to our dialogue today. We call on all who still have nationals in Northeast Syria to step forward, to take responsibility for their remaining nationals so we can prevent the resurgence of ISIS, relieve humanitarian needs, and protect human rights. As Secretary Blinken has said, the status quo in Northeast Syria is unsustainable. A number of countries have stepped up to show us that repatriation, reintegration, and when appropriate, prosecution is a model that works. The United States stands ready to assist any other country that wants to take these steps. The core of the success of the coalition to defeat ISIS is that the global community stood together to defeat a shared threat. We must have that same determined unity as we all work together to alleviate this crisis. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Minister? Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this event for inviting me to participate in this discussion. The main question is why there is a lot of attention to Al-Hol camp. What's going on there? Which kind of camp is this? Or center? Some people they call it camp, some people they call it center. I usually describe this camp as a training camp, ideological training camp. But which kind of ideology? It is about the ideology of ISIS. So that means if we will leave the camp as it is, so we will expect next generation, a completely different generation. A generation which has been educated on the basis of ISIS extremist ideology. And of course, it is easy to train people in camps about extremist ideology because in camps, the life is not so easy in general. The Al-Hol camp is not so far away from the Iraqi border. It is inside Syria and Hasaka, but it is about 15 kilometers from Iraqi border. And it's under the control of Syrian Democratic Forces. In Al-Hol camp, there are about 50,000 persons there, or families, I'm sorry. The Iraqi government was able for us to bring back 1,000, to give the exact number, to bring back 1,561 families. So we brought them back. The majority of the population of the camp are divided between Syrian Iraqis and Syrian people and Iraqi people, Syrian citizen and Iraqi citizen. Yet there are many foreigners also. There are about, as it has been mentioned, about 2,000 fighters, foreigners. Some of them, they are from other Arab countries, especially from North Africa, but also from Gulf countries. And the other fighters, terrorist fighters, they are from European, Russia, and many other countries around the world. Some countries started to take back their citizens, but some countries, they limited that only to the children and not to the adults. So they are trying to find out the identity of those children, and they are taking them back, leaving the parents in the camps. Of course, leaving the parents in the camp, that means they are leaving the terrorists there. I think their plan is when they will bring back the children to re-educate them in a different way and to dislinkage them from their background and from their parents. Some countries, they are taking the mother and the children back. So they are leaving the father there. Of course, the father, most of the time, they were part of the terrorist organizations. So we have got these questions, and we were in negotiation, still in negotiation with many countries, especially the European governments, so that they can take back their own terrorists, I mean, leaving the terrorists behind in these camps, there will be a threat. Why are we worried, we, the Iraqis, about this camp and other prisons inside Syria? We were the victim of the terrorist attacks, and ISIS, in fact, was founded in Iraq and in Syria. And ISIS, for about 3 years, occupied 1/3 of the country. So, large part of the country was under the occupation of ISIS. In fact, for a while, ISIS had half of the territory, Syrian territory, under its control, and 1/3 of Iraqis. And we are talking about perhaps 8 to 10 million people were under, let's say, the occupation of ISIS state. When the state collapsed in 2017, so some of these terrorists, they crossed the border, and their families, they crossed the border and they went to Syria, because the Syria, until now, they are active, in fact. But there also, because of the fighting attacks, the Syrian Democratic Forces, they were able to attack many areas which was under the control of ISIS, and arrested many of them. As a result, now there are thousands of those ISIS fighters in prisons, but under the control of Syrian Democratic Forces. And as I mentioned, thousands of members, Iraqis, citizen and Syrian and other members of the terrorist organization are staying in this camp, Al-Hol camp. We prepared a program, a plan to get the Iraqis back. And we established a center in Jeddah, near Mosul in Nainawa. And we received the families there in the first place, the mothers with their children. Which kind of problem do we have in this center? In the first place is about reintegration. But integration and what? Because they have been educated. The mothers sometimes, to be honest, they are part of the organization. And they are believers but the problem is with the children, how to deal with those children. And how can we educate them while the mother still believes in different ideology? So reintegration is a process, a long process. And to be honest, also, we have not a lot of experience how to educate those children. Of course, we started schools and different kind of curriculum, but still educating those children far away from the ideology that they have learned, far away from the doctrine that has been the tools of ISIS organization is not so easy. Because it is a fact. In Al-Hol, there's an organization, leadership, they are leading, and there is financial support coming to them from abroad. So they have got contact with the outside world, those terrorist organizations. Even in prison, sometimes they have got contact with the outside world. So Al-Hol camp is as a center or camp for ideological training to produce future terrorists is very dangerous. It's dangerous for Syria, but it's dangerous for Iraq and for the world, because as you know, ISIS is not anymore a local organization, is not a national organization, is not even a regional organization. It is an international organization. ISIL, which started in Iraq, as I said, separate to Syria, and then to now in African countries, and in Afghanistan now. Just, I had a lengthy discussion with some people from Afghanistan. They were telling me about the fight between Taliban and ISIS. They call them, I think they're Khorasan. So even in Afghanistan, they are active. And they told me that those who are leading ISIS in Afghanistan, they are from Iraq or from Syria. So they are bringing their experience when they were fighting in Iraq or in Syria, they are bringing this experience to African countries or to other countries. Therefore, dealing with the Al-Hol camp is not only an Iraqi responsibility, and it is not only a threat to Iraqi security. We consider it as a threat to our security. Imagine if Syrian democratic forces cannot control their camp for any reason. Let's say if there will be fight between Syrian democratic forces and the Turkish army, because Turkish army are there. If there will be fight between these two, let's say, armies, what does it mean controlling the camps and also controlling the prisons? That means those terrorist leaders, terrorist fighters, they will be free and they can easily cross the border and once again come crossing the border and coming to Iraq and starting fight. Especially, you see ISIS as a military organization, as a terrorist state collapsed, but ISIS as an ideology is there. I don't say everywhere, I don't say it is strong as it was, but the ideology is there. So the ideology of ISIS is a threat. The ideology of ISIS produced terrorists. So we have got two kinds of fight. Fighting those terrorists who has got weapons in their hands, but also fighting the ideology. And our problem, even with the children now in the Jad'a camps near Mosul, we are trying to re-educate, to find the process of integration into the society, but it needs time and it needs also new method how to educate those people. So that's why we need international cooperation, so that we will not suffer once again from terrorism, because when terrorists will find their way in Iraq and Syria, it will be a threat to many European countries. It will be a threat to other countries. So it is for the sake of your security and international peace, we need this cooperation. And thank you very much once again for inviting me, for having me. And thank you for listening. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to the Global Counterterrorism Forum and particularly to the United States for hosting, I think, what is a very important and timely conversation. So, as Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights, I visited Northeast Syria in July, and so I have recently been in Al-Hol, Al-Raj, Alaya prison, or Kesh, Huri, places that are called rehabilitation centers, but I do want to be clear, these are detention centers for children and Panoramic prison. And I'd like to share some of those firsthand observations about the situation on the ground. I want to frame for you some of the legal consequences or issues that follow from those observations, as well as some broader observations on repatriation, consistent with non-refoulement, integration, and of course, prosecution. So we've heard that there are approximately 65,000 individuals detained in Northeast Syria in various places of detention, including prisons, closed camps, and again, these things that are called rehabilitation centers. 23,000 of those are Syrian, 42,000 of them are foreign nationals, approximately 12,000 are third country nationals. Now it's worth noting that you've heard different kinds of numbers up here, right? Everybody has a different number. And I think that actually goes to a really important point, that we don't have clear public numbers. And even when we were in Northeast Syria, my team and I, and we asked for head counts in particular prisons, the detaining power said it didn't have those numbers. I just want to point out the obvious point that if you're holding large numbers of people in detention, you're obliged as a matter of international law, including international humanitarian law, to have lists of the people who are in your detention, particularly when most of those people are in fact children. So I think we have a sizable challenge actually in measuring what are these numbers, the differences between those numbers. And one of the things I would stress is that although we talk about having one detaining authority, which is the Syrian Democratic Forces. My observation and the end of mission statement I issued suggests that in fact we have a number of regimes within regimes, meaning there isn't a unitary detention regimes. There are regimes within regimes, and those have significant legal consequences. One of the things that you've heard, I think, both from Deputy Secretary of State and from the Minister is that the vast majority of the people who are being held are children. And I think we should all pause and really reflect on what that means to have this size of child population held in what is arbitrary detention. There has been no legal process to determine the legality or status of any of these people in detention. And I think for many of us and some of the actors who have a responsibility to protect children, but also more broadly to protect those in detention, it is extremely concerning that we start from the proposition that we have mass arbitrary detention of children in Northeast Syria. So let me make three sets of observations, one on children, one on women and girls, and one on the men, many of whom I interviewed and my team interviewed while we were there. So let me start with children. Well, the obvious, the vast majority of this population is children. And I will say from a human rights perspective, I think one of our problems here is terminology. Because if we're going to call this amount of children terrorists or associated terrorists or would-be terrorists or cubs of the caliphate, why would anybody bring them back? Because you're going to have a hard time convincing anybody that anyone in that category should be brought home. And in fact, none of these children have had any form of legal determination. They didn't choose to go to Syria or be born in Syria. And so we have zero legal process in place, no process to determine the status of these children. And the detention is arbitrary, it's mass, and it's indefinite in nature. And all of that, to state the obvious, is simply inconsistent with international obligations of every state. I would point out, and we interviewed many children, I interviewed most of the boys, or saw most of the boys, hundreds of them, who are held in Huri and Arkesh detention centers. So these are all young boys, mostly between the ages, some as young as 9, the vast majority between 10 and 14, sizable portion who are older. Many of them were subject to coercive interrogation. And I'd like to state the obvious, none of them had lawyers. None of them had parents present. There was no control in place over the kind of treatment that these children experienced. The conditions in the camp, well, you're all tired hearing about them because you know what they are, but they are dire. When I was there in July, it was 50-degree heat, people living in tents, a massive shortage of water. And I think, as the minister knows, we have an extraordinary problem of water. The spigot has been turned off in that region. There is an absence of food. And my mandate and other human rights bodies have found that the conditions, just those material conditions of detention, constitute torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment under international law. The health facilities are inadequate. There is a massive breakout of tuberculosis, something I'll talk about in a number of facilities, but regular childhood diseases are rife. All of this to say that the basic things that make for the possibility, not for even for a child to be rehabilitated, because a child has to survive in order to be rehabilitated, are not present on the territory. And many of these children are your children. And these children lack identity. They have no identity documents. So one of our problems in figuring out who's there, where they should go, is they don't have documents. And the most essential right of anyone is the right to identity, because every single right you have follows from the right to identity. And many governments, and you will know the challenges, will say, well, we don't have a consular presence, so therefore we can't give them identity. But the result is that we leave these children in a legal vacuum for which there is no solution, because they neither have no identity, and by putting them in a box of terrorists by virtue of where they were born and who they were born to, we deprive them of the right to actually have any kind of dignified existence. Let me finally focus on one specific issue that I encountered in Northeast Syria, which my end of mission statement focused on, which is the systematic separation of children from their mothers, boys mostly over 10, but not always, violently separated from their mothers and put into other places of detention. So it's just interesting. I'd encourage you all to think about the fact that we have an ICC warrant out for forced separation of children in another part of the world. So I think we should be thinking very seriously about what the legal implications are for having children systematically separated from their families in Northeast Syria. I met a lot of these boys. I have teenage boys. And so I can tell you that a lot of these boys are enormously traumatized, hugely traumatized. They talked about Drake. I don't know how many of you know Drake as a rap musician. They talked about the music they liked, the things they wanted to learn. And while it's clear that many of these boys have had complex stories to get to these places, they are still under international law protected as children. And we have decades of experience of dealing with children in armed conflict. And in every other place, we do not say that the child is the cause of the problem when the child is the victim. And here we have thousands of children who are the victims of ISIL. And yet we choose to treat them as non-children and deprive them of their fundamental rights as children because of who they were born to and where they were born. And when we do that, I just want to be clear, we set a precedent for other places in the world to do exactly the same. So the call to action here isn't just about Syria and these children, although this is the largest mass arbitrary deprivation of liberty for children anywhere in the world, is the precedent this sets to do the same elsewhere. My second set of observations are about women and girls. So again, we have mass arbitrary deprivation of liberty, arbitrary detention of women and girls. We have structural and systematic violence, including sexual coercion by the detaining power. We have sustained violence by women who are committed, as the minister said. We do have women who remain committed to the ideology of ISIS. And so they police and harm the women that they see as non-conforming. So there's these layers of violence that are meted upon women. And every woman I have interviewed, and I have interviewed hundreds of women who ended up in Northeast Syria, there is not a single story that defines how they got there. Many of them were trafficked, many of them were coerced, some of them went willingly, but then hold them accountable. Don't leave them to rot and die without a process that defines whether they did something or they didn't. We have inadequate healthcare. I don't even know how to describe how inadequate it is, but there's complex health, including complex mental health challenges for this population. There is no capacity to treat those complexities there. There is no adequate treatment for wounds or other harms that people suffered. And I saw women in Al-Roj and Al-Hol camp, many of them still with open wounds that can't be treated because there's nowhere to take them or not adequate facilities. In order to get medication in these camps, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. So certainly some women do have means of payment, but many of them don't and don't have access to essential medicines. And I do want to point out that the part of Al-Hol, which is Al-Hol Annex, where third country nationals are held, it's like a closed box. I couldn't get in. Some people can get in. Intelligence services who want to interview women can get in, but independent observers can't get in. And so when we have people that we can't see, we can't count, and we don't know what is happening to them, in international law, we call that an enforced disappearance, because you have no idea who's there and what's happened to them. I remain deeply concerned about this lack of access, including the fact that many of these women have their phones taken away, which means they can't communicate with their governments properly. They can't communicate with their families. They certainly can't communicate with their boys who've been taken away. The third category I want to make some observation about are men. Again, mass arbitrary detention of men. And I know we use the word terrorist, but terrorism is a legal term. It's not a term of art. It involves defining someone's responsibility for a particular crime whether it's membership of an organization, travel to a territory, or other crimes. And when we fail and there is no legal process in place in Northeast Syria to separate men who have been responsible, to what degree of responsibility, from men who are not. When I visited Alaya prison, I went door to door. I was told that there were no boys in that prison, that it was an adult prison. Every single cell I opened had boys in it, some as young as 12. So we have young boys being housed with adult men, men who are believed to be associated with a designated non-state armed group. We've had trials, and I have just issued a position paper on prosecutions in Northeast Syria, which I'll be happy to share, and it's on the mandate's website. But I have serious concerns about the efficacy and fairness of trials that have been held in Northeast Syria. And I would say to member states, are you in the business of designating trial to non-state actors? Is that where we are? Have we as member states decided that we will let non-state armed groups, the ones we like, run trials, and have issues with the ones we don't like running trials? The precedent of trial and criminal process belongs to the sovereign state for good reason, because we hold you accountable for how you run those trials. So this subcontraction to an actor who does not have the resources to run trials adequately, again, is a precedent that you as member states will all have to live with when the next non-state armed group says they can run trials for people they call terrorists, and you may not agree with that. I'm deeply concerned about the situation of men in Panorama Prison, which I visited, and my report documents the confirmation by the SDF that we have large-scale, out of control tuberculosis in that facility. We also have no treatment for tuberculosis in that facility. And we also have systematic malnourishment of men in that facility. So let me just quote a World Health Organization statistic, is that if you don't treat tuberculosis, in 50% of cases, people die. Now, again, are we in the business of allowing men, no matter what they may be perceived or responsible for, to die from tuberculosis or from starvation because we are not sufficiently concerned about their welfare in detention? And it's hard to be concerned about the welfare of people who have meted out such egregious harm on the territory. But the measure of rule of law societies is that that is not what we do. People are responsible for crimes, we hold them responsible. And in conflict, people who are detained have rights to fundamental humane treatment, no matter what acts they committed. Let me close by then saying that we have serious violations of international humanitarian law in play. We have serious violations of international human rights law. And we have, I think, we are in the territory of what we can only describe as core crimes. Crimes that engage erga omnes, I'm going to sound like an old-fashioned lawyer here, but responsibilities for all states. So what do we need? And I'm going to close on this. We need repatriation. Let's be clear. The only international law compliant solution to this is repatriation. And I want to commend those states who've been making extraordinary efforts, including the United States, not just to repatriate their own, but to help you repatriate your own. And I want us to say we need a narrative change. Yes, there are people in these camps and prisons who have committed serious violations of international law. But if you call all of them terrorists without any due process, you are not going to convince governments to bring them back. And the point is that the vast majority of people in these camps are children. And I would encourage us all not to use those words when we describe children, and encourage states, you all, to bring back your children. And the good news is that actually repatriation, though it's hard, and again, I want to commend the government of Iraq for its stellar and difficult efforts in bringing back large numbers of its nationals, is that it can be done. And we have countries like Germany, which is, I was in Germany this summer and was able to sit with the judges who are prosecuting core crimes in a number of cases in Germany and a number of German federal states. So it's possible to prosecute.
The IIIM and the Commission for Syria will be happy to help you because they have gathered the kind of evidence that we're seeing work in many countries to do that kind of hard work. And we've seen countries like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, countries that I was in when they brought back large numbers of their nationals, demonstrate how you do large-scale repatriations. And it's not going to be perfect. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. There are challenges in doing this kind of work, but the reality is, as we've said, the long-term security of all states depends on repatriation. States cannot leave this problem to the neighborhood. They cannot place unfair burdens on countries like Iraq by failing to bring back their nationals. This is a displacement of our fundamental obligations of comity to one another. And it is also a time bomb, because let's be clear, I don't want to preach the ABC of radicalization, but if you hold people in these conditions for this kind of duration, what's going to happen? It is not rocket science. And we can't hold them responsible for that. We have to hold ourselves to account for that. So let me close on a positive note. I met hundreds of boys, and most of them were asking about their moms, as teenage boys sometimes do, but many of them were asking for the possibility of a better life, a chance to go to school, a chance to be back with their families, a chance to be normal. And that's a human rights possibility here, but it's also a security imperative that you allow these children to live a normal life. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to thank our hosts for having us here and the previous speakers for their remarks. You just heard harrowing remarks and accounts of extreme deprivation and suffering of thousands of children who remain without legal, physical, or psychological protection in the northeast of Syria. This is happening to Syrian children, to Iraqi children, and children from dozens of countries around the world. Children who have been stranded for 4.5 years, some for even longer. Some who have spent more than half or even their entire childhood in a place not fit for a child. I was regional director in the Middle East and North Africa before taking on this assignment, and I visited Al Roj, Al Hol, and the annex. I actually got into part of the annex, and it's absolutely the case that this is not a place fit for children. These children have spent the critical years of their development, years they won't get back, years without access to primary education, years of fear and of exposure to violence. And as you've heard, some of these children are severely malnourished. Some have terrible injuries sustained in the conflict or the siege of Al-Hasaka prison. Others live with disabilities. Many have witnessed the deaths of siblings, friends, or parents, and hundreds have been arbitrarily separated from their families. All have limited access to basic services such as healthcare, clean water, civil documentation, family contact, and other support. In collaboration with implementing partners, UNICEF is trying to support these children. We actively provide humanitarian assistance and support to children and families in Al Hol and Roj camps. But our activities are constrained by changing political and conflict dynamics, access and security constraints, and lack of sustained funding. Whether it's clean water, basic literacy, psychosocial support, as an international community, we are not meeting the basic standards to which these children have a right. Nonetheless, UNICEF continues to advance the protection of and support for children both in camps and in more formal places of detention. In addition to providing access to services, UNICEF continues to call for improved condition in the camps and prisons where children are held and greater access to essential services. We also call for an end to the practice of separating boys from their families and for their reunification. Moreover, within Syria and in capitals around the world, UNICEF continues to call upon member states to take concrete steps to safely repatriate and reintegrate children and their mothers consistent with international law and the best interests of the child. Within the limits of our mandate, UNICEF supports states willing to do so, both to facilitate safe repatriation and to provide reintegration assistance for returned children. And there has been progress. Since 2017, some 5,000 children, that's our figure, have returned to their countries of origin. Since the beginning of 2023, as we heard, 12 member states have repatriated 1,439 children from Northeast Syria. You have already heard from His Excellency Minister Hussein about the efforts of the Iraqi government. UNICEF continues to work closely to support the thousands of returnee Iraqi children. In Central Asia, we also work closely with governments after children return. The majority of these children are now living with family members, including in many cases, their mothers who returned with them. While facing challenges, many are doing well. And while UNICEF supports countries to invest in services and address the needs of returning children, we also support governments to strengthen systems so that they can support all children in the community. Following several years of work in June of this year, with the support of the European Union, UNICEF's Europe and Central Asian Regional Office issued a compendium of promising practices from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan on the repatriation and reintegration of children, which reflects on lessons learned and presents positive practices. The compendium identifies 10 areas of good practices, but today I want to highlight 5 that promote the rights and recovery of children. First, supporting family-based care rather than placing children in institutions when they get back to their countries of origin. This avoids further isolating children. Second, providing mental health and psychosocial support. This addresses the effects of violence and deprivation. Third, enrolling children in schools or catch-up classes or providing them with supplementary tutoring and language support. 4, proactively engaging families and communities to support and promote social acceptance while avoiding stigma. This improves children's sense of social belonging. And 5, finding ways for mothers and children to remain together or to maintain contact, including when a mother faces prosecution. This support children's connection to the only family most of them have ever known. It's not easy, but it's been done, and it's been done successfully. The positive outcomes we see from these practices show us that it is possible to meet national security requirements while promoting the best interests of children. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the more than 4.5 years since the battle in Baghuz, the protection and rights of children who are stranded in the northeast of Syria has been a priority for UNICEF at the highest level and across the organization. Although today we emphasize the needs of foreign children and the urgency to repatriate them where it is safe and in their best interest, I also stress that we must support every child stranded in the northeast of Syria, irrespective of their background, to have a long-term solution, including Syrian children. Whether boy or girl, adolescent, infant or toddler, Syrian or foreigner, every child has the right to support, protection, and assistance. In this regard, all the boys summarily separated from their families must be released, reunited, and given the same opportunities to return home without legal jeopardy. And we must continue to explore avenues for durable solution for Syrian children and for foreign children who are unable or unwilling to be repatriated, and all of their families. UNICEF continues to urge states to prioritize children's best interests, to work together to address this collective responsibility. UNICEF stands ready for dialogue and action towards safe repatriation and other long-term solutions so that no child is left behind. Thank you.
So thank you very much. That ends our first panel. We're going to spend a few minutes shifting to our next panel. But I just want to thank our 4 distinguished speakers who bring so much experience to this issue, who in each case emphasized from different perspectives how imperative it is that we as a global community do more to deal with this problem. So thank you. One more round of applause for our 4 speakers. Best of luck, okay? We're here to support you. See you in Baghdad, we hope. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Okay, could I please invite Mariana and Mansour to please come take their seats? You're over here.
Just take my jacket. It's a little bit-
Okay, let's continue on with the second panel. I'm Steve Hill. I am the Executive Secretary of the International Institute for Justice and the Rule of Law. It's been a real pleasure for our institute, which is based in Malta. We work with criminal justice practitioners from around the world. Our ambition is to create a platform, a network for criminal justice practitioners to discuss pressing problems. One of the areas where we've been working is this issue of repatriations, and we've heard about the scope of the challenges. We've been honored to convene two different working groups of various practitioners to discuss the scope of the problem, but also more importantly, how what we can do to address it. Clearly, more international dialogue is needed and more international cooperation. And so the purpose of this panel today is to help discuss from a legal and technical perspective how we can address and how we have been able to start to address some of the concerns. We have two speakers today. Our first speaker is Ms. Mariana Gasser, the Special Coordinator for Northeast Syria at the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC. Mariana brings a wealth of experience in diplomacy, international affairs, and human rights, and has had a long career with the ICRC, including as head of the ICRC delegation in Syria, where she worked for many years. The second speaker is Mr. Mansour Hodi, Director of Public Safety at the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Kosovo. Mr. Hodi led one of the first repatriation efforts of foreign terrorist fighters from Northeast Syria in April 2019, when the first plane of 110 Kosovar citizens landed in that country. So I'd invite the speakers to take the floor from their seats. We just have really 7 minutes per intervention because we'd like to give the floor to various interventions. And so to Mariana Gasser, may I ask you to address what are the most pressing challenges that the ICRC faces in its work in assessing detention facilities in North Sea Syria? And what can the international community do to support your important humanitarian work? Over to you, please.
Thank you. I sit here.
Yes, yes.
Very good. No, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues. Yes, the ICRC is present, has an office, has a team in Northeast Syria since many years. In fact, I was there when we opened our office. And then maybe I will come with some of the challenges. It is true that a lot has been said in the first panel. It is also but difficult to come after the speakers of the first panel and especially the special rapporteur. But it's good also I would like to echo some of the main challenges and what needs to be done. Well, I will also not start to describe, because a lot has been said and you know it all very well, about the humanitarian situation in the camps, which is extremely dire and has really worsened over the years. The living conditions in these camps are below standard. the infrastructure is inadequate. There's a lack of water. The people are living in temporary shelters, insufficient health and education services. And maybe one of the challenges also, which is also quite difficult to for the people first in this area, but also for humanitarian organizations, is a little bit all the military and security incidents, including the ones which took place recently, which is also affecting regular and unimpeded access to the camps. And then I will say a few words later to the places of detention. This recurrent instability, including in camps, including in places of detention, coupled with limited access to essential services, represent really a major challenge for the physical safety, mental well-being, and the development of the thousands of children, of women stranded in the camps, and of men. I would like also to confirm that the big majority of the people in the camps are children. I will not come with figures. But I would like also to underline, as it was said in the first panel, that we are very concerned about the children who many have witnessed directly violence, are in urgent need of medical and psychosocial support. Indeed, many were brought to this area, to northeast Syria, which is, and especially is a conflict zone. Many also of these children were born in these camps, and they have not known anything else than they have never left the perimeter of the camp. So these children are spending several years. These years are very important for their development, and they are, so it's extremely difficult for children to have also to live normally in such conditions. We would like to acknowledge that a lot of efforts have been done by numerous countries to repatriate children. And what is very important since approximately, I think, since 2021, even earlier, but very important also that children were repatriated along with their mother. It's for the ICRC and for the UN and others, the preservation of the family unity is very important also for these children to be closely with their mothers, not to be separated, especially if they are repatriated. For many of them, it would be it would be a new country, and so on. So it's very important. Maybe I'll say two more words. Is in the places of detention, the ICRC could regain access to places of detention. In fact, for the time being, only to one place, which is Hueran detention facility. Yes, we are very concerned of what we are witnessing, the teams there, acute and very severe health situation. Yes, tuberculosis, this we can confirm. We can confirm that detainees have passed away, and if nothing is being done for them, and we all know that tuberculosis also can affect, if it's not treated on time, can affect the broader community. So we are also very concerned for this. We are putting a lot of efforts. We are having also a lot of support from some countries who are trying also to support the ICRC to respond to these humanitarian needs. But this is a challenge because we don't have regular access to these places of detention. We speak now about one place, but as it was said at the beginning, there are numerous other. So therefore, for the ICRC too, the importance to repatriate be children, women, and not to forget men. And I think a lot, it is really an emergency situation. And there were numerous positive repatriation examples. So I think it would be extremely important to accelerate the repatriation process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gasser, for sharing your valuable observations and those of the ICRC. We wish you all success in your important work. Now to Mr. Mensur Hoti from Kosovo. States in the Western Balkans were among the first with strong political will to repatriate foreign terrorist fighters. Let me ask you, what has been your experience in repatriating nationals been like? What motivated your country to act? And what lessons would you share with other countries in similar situations? You have the floor, 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, ladies and gentlemen. This 7 minutes timing will change a lot of things, but I will tackle the most important parts of your questions. So it's true that we have started the repatriation, not just in Kosovo, but also some countries in Western Balkans. I will mention here 3 main reasons why we did this and why we have this decision. So first of all is humanitarian. I will not discuss about it because it was mentioned in previous discussions. Anyone knows what we are discussing about, and especially we have in mind children, which we consider the victims of this process. So we don't call them with different, let's say, names and titles. Second reason is legal and judicial process. So we are obliged to bring back our citizens, no matter where they are. And we wanted to stand before the judge and prosecute all those who committed crimes there in Syria and also in Iraq and in other countries. The third reason is security issue. So we were aware that it will come a time when our citizens will probably escape from there and try to find a safe place for them. So no safer place than home. They will find a way to come through illegal ways to Kosovo. And that's true, and that's the fact, because those days we have evidence that some family members of FTFs from around the region and from Syria and Turkey in some cases, they have found the way and traveled by illegal roads and arrived to Kosovo or to other countries in the region. So do we have challenges? Yes, of course, but we cannot afford to sit and do nothing. So if we go back when we had the decision for taking or repatriate our citizens back, we would do the same thing even today. We had 3 operations of repatriation, and we are strongly committed to repatriate all of our citizens which are in the region. And for that, let's say, operation that we held together, I would like to thank United States and some other countries which helped us to make it happen. When we discussed about the children's, which are my main topic of this panel, I would say shortly that the life of the children can be changed. And anyone who wants to witness that can anytime come to Kosovo and see that by their own eyes. Being in the position to witness the children of 2019 when they come back and following them until today, I can assure you that they have been developed like other children in Kosovo. We have children which are among the best students in their schools, and they are representing their schools in national events inside Kosovo. So you can see and feel that the change is possible. I will try to close with this, that if anyone has doubts if this can be done, just take example of Kosovo. When Kosovo had the possibility to do that, anyone else has the means and possibilities to do that. And you need to live this process and see how the children will change. And we are sure that they have given the second chance of life. And that's enough satisfactory for us and for anyone who was part of this process. I will conclude with this. We still have citizens in the Syria area, but in the specific area, we have just FTFs. We are determined to bring them back. We'll ask from international community and international organization which started to work there to share data with specific states about the citizen that we might have them there and we don't know, and we will really appreciate that. And also we have a specific number of children which are outside that specific area, which are not discussion for this panel. Thank you very much. Ready to take any questions on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Hoti, and I appreciate the conciseness of your presentation, which truly complemented what Mariana said, and I think you had a clear message, which is that one can see the change that we want to achieve. So thank you very much. I'd now like to turn the floor to United States Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Mr. Ian Moss, for some summary remarks. We will then pass the floor for brief interventions, which I should say are limited to 2 minutes. We have 6 interventions from the floor. Remember that this event ends promptly at 1700 hours. Deputy Coordinator.
Might have to use your-
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you, Marianne and Mansour. I'll be pretty brief. I think that many points have been made and made in a much more succinct and compelling way than I'm probably able to do. But I will share a couple of observations. First is we know that this is not an easy problem to solve, but it nonetheless is soluble. We can do hard things working together. We defeated ISIS. That was hard. And this is still part of that effort, but working together, we can get that done. There are 2 principal obstacles. The first is political. Political will is frankly, we have to have frank conversations with ourselves and with our governments. And that's what part of today's discussion is about. The second principal obstacle is technical. That too has, I think, a pretty straightforward opportunity for us to address. The United States has consistently provided and facilitated the exchange of technical information and sharing of best practices and expertise to help governments with nationals in Northeast Syria to both bring them from Northeast Syria and to rehabilitate and reintegrate them when they get back. We know from what has been shared here today and in other conversations that we've had that this requires a comprehensive effort. It doesn't end when the plane lands. Arguably, that's when the process begins. We stand ready not only to help you get your folks home, but to be a resource and to facilitate connections and dialogue so that once they are home, we can put in place programs that mitigate the threat that individuals may pose, while also ensuring that we are setting folks up for success so that they can be peaceful and productive contributing members of society. There are a number of governments here represented, our Spanish colleagues and our Dutch colleagues who have been stalwart partners in this effort. We thank you for your leadership and your example. We also thank the government of Iraq, which again has a problem much larger than the rest of us combined in this room. And they, I think, are able to serve as kind of a guiding light when it comes to doing what is necessary. And then I think finally, I think our colleague, the Special Rapporteur in particular, said this way more artfully than I can, but essentially, we are complicit in the deprivation and the misery of these kids if we continue to fail to act. I'm proud that the United States is leading by example. I urge other governments to do that. We will continue to do that as long as there is a child in Northeast Syria. It is absolutely incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we give them some other option. I agree with the special rapporteur that our language matters, but we are with power to make sure that that language doesn't turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. These kids have other options. We just have to, as responsible parties, help put them in a situation where they can avail themselves of those other options. So with that, Steve.
Thank you so much, Ian, for those summaries. I can say on behalf of the multinational team working in Malta at the IOJ that it is our pleasure to be able to support the things that you're talking about in terms of best practices, technical cooperation, exchange of information, and hopefully be a small part of helping solve this big problem. We'll now pass to interventions from the floor. I have 6 interventions on the speakers list. Please limit to 2 interventions. I'd like to first give the floor to Elmedin Konakovic, Acting Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor, Madam, followed by Spain.
Thank you very much. My name is Emina Merdan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Elmedin Konakovic, and he sends his regards. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend, but I'm the Acting Assistant Minister for Multilateral Relations.
Thank you.
I wish to thank to the host and co-hosts of this meeting for organizing it on such an important topic. Also, I wish to thank to all panelists for their important interventions. I would like to stress that Bosnia and Herzegovina is committed to preventing and combating terrorism as a global threat, as well as to contributing to the efforts of the international community in that regard. Bosnia and Herzegovina has been supported by the United States and the EU partners who recognized us as a partner in fighting global security challenges. We are also a member of the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. We were the first country in the region of the Western Balkans that made amendments to its criminal law, according to which organization or participation in foreign wars was sanctioned. From 2012 to 2016, a total of between 250 and 300 nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina went to the conflict areas of Iraq and Syria. Out of this number, 55% were men, 25% were women, and 20% were minors. As of end of 2015, all departures of nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina to Iraq and Syria conflict areas were suspended entirely. 62 adults and 22 children are considered to have returned to Bosnia and Herzegovina so far. 8 children whose parents are nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina or are originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina have returned to other countries. According to operational data, there are currently 82 nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the territory of Syria and Iraq. We have adopted the repatriation plan and the program for reintegration, rehabilitation, and resocialization of nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina returning from the conflict areas in Syria and Iraq. The repatriation plan outlines the procedures for a safe, humane, and controlled return, security checks establishing identity and nationality of persons subject to repatriation, and provision of diplomatic, consular, legal, and humanitarian assistance. The reintegration, rehabilitation, and resocialization program for all categories of nationals of Bosnia and Herzegovina contains short, medium, and long-term security measures, health and social protection measures, access to education, economic support and employment, legal assistance in local community, and other necessary measures. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina will keep on working to resolve the issue of repatriation and reintegration of our citizens, children, and women who are still in Syrian camps, to return those who are not a security threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Acting Assistant Minister. I'd now like to give the floor to Spain. And if you could please introduce yourself for a short intervention, followed by Turkey.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and also congratulations for organizing this meeting. You know, with this subject and whatever has been said before reminded me of precisely the operation that we carried out months ago concerning 13 children and 2 adults. And everything has been said by the special rapporteur, also the representative by UNICEF, reminding me very much of what happened. First of all, well, also what Mr. Moss said about political will. Political will is necessary to carry out this kind of operations. And of course, in our case, that was very clear. And then, of course, a technical side of the story, which is something that we have to take into account and thank the US for supporting logistically and all the effort that was made. But there is another element which is important to me, which is the multidimensional side of this story. And the team that we set up in order to carry out this operation was reflecting precisely this kind of this nature of this problem, which regards children, regards adults, regards the situation in the camps, regards what the state does afterwards when the children come back to their country. Some of them were born in those camps, and they have not seen anything but violence. And so we think that we needed very much, this multidimensional approach to the operation. And we had people from Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Affairs and Inclusiveness, authorities of the region of Madrid, the authorities also from the prosecutor office in charge of protecting children's rights. So it was somehow reflecting this kind of approach that is needed in order to carry out something which, to us, to every one of us, in a more personal approach, was very important, because for us, we understood that we were carrying out something important for the lives of children that had an opportunity. Thanks to that.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing Spain's experience, and particularly on the team building and interagency element. I'd like to give the floor to Turkey, please, followed by Germany. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to first touch upon, through your questions, the humanitarian and human rights situation. Human rights situation in Northeast Syria is problematic. It's not only us Turkish officials saying that. Several UN reports and NGO analysis are available for anyone's perusal. Human rights and long-standing terrorist legacy does not blend well. Those who forcefully control the area is a clear embodiment of this contradiction. In a sense, improvement of the human rights is not a concern for those terrorist elements. Their primary goal is to keep that control through abusing every help and every endorsement they receive. And this attitude highlights this responsibility of the third countries backing them. Repressive attitude of this terrorist structure on the Arab majority and the efforts to delete Arab characteristics of the region are all extensively displayed in the UN reports. The schools with Arabic teaching are closed down, teachers not cooperating with the imposed curriculum are fired, or the names of the places are turned from Arabic into Kurdish. The bad management of the camps, as some speakers previously noted, in Northeast Syria is also under the radar of the international community. The violations do not remain limited to those measures and also include violent attitudes like arbitrary arrests, looting, forced recruitment of children, suppressing peaceful demonstrations, banning political activities of political group. Recent clashes in Deir ez-Zor area also demonstrated once again that the terrorist elements does not align with the demography and local ingredients of the region. So we expect our allies to revert to the path of wisdom and recognize the fact that cooperation with terrorist elements on the ground for the purpose of countering Daesh will bring further destabilization in the country and in the region. As for ISIS recruitment potentials, while Turkey counters both terrorist entities in north of Syria, there is every reason to expect the Daesh members who were held captive by PKK-YPG will have more drive to continue terrorist campaign against Turkey. The drivers are ideological and tactical at leadership level, and revenge and opportunity driven at individual level. Additionally, the threat is also multiple levels. First, there is the high high possibility of these individuals being instrumentalized by PKK in false flag attacks, as was the case in Beyoğlu bombing last year. Second, there is no credible intel on FTF networks of those who are repatriated and remained in the region. This increases the global threat, and particularly from manipulation by foreign intelligence ops. About government's plan for identifying and repatriating nationals, for us, Turkey, the important aspect of this question is whether the repatriations would be conducted through legitimate ways and legitimate actors. Once this scene and this understanding is set, ID verifications and consequent repatriations would follow. One last word about terrorist elements should be denied any room to use the management of the camps to legitimize themselves. This includes rejecting their calls to persecute the Daesh inmates in the region. And finally, I should also note that Iraqi minister, honorable minister, talk of a clash between Turkey and these terrorist elements as we identify them. If I were in his place, and with all due respect, I would not call this eventuality a clash, but rather it is a self-defense move against a terrorist organization by a sovereign state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Sorry.
I have a question actually, which is a question to particularly the experts in the room. There are the third country citizens, there are the Iraqi citizens, but there are also the Syrians in the camps. So what happens to the Syrians? Who deals with them? Like the United States offers kindly its assistance to the other countries for repatriation. We heard about 60-30 people in cases of the Balkans. We're talking about thousands of Syrians, Arabs, who have different affiliations of tribes and regions. And that what Mustafa has just said, there are issues there, ethnic strife now. So that is an issue that we really have to collectively work, because unlike other countries who have to fly their FTFs, we have everybody right across our border. We have seen how both our neighboring countries, Iraq and Syria, have lost their territory adjacent to us, to ISIL once. We don't want to see that again. So, or to be controlled by another terrorist group. So that is an issue. The Syrians, what are we going to do about Syrians?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Director General. I have 3 countries remaining on the speakers list, and then 1 request for the floor, plus now a question, which, okay, Ian, we can go to after these. So let's move on that. I would like to give the floor to Germany, please. Thank you, Madam Director General, followed by the European Union.
Thank you very much. Tanja von Uslar, legal advisor to the German Foreign Ministry. Germany has been mentioned as an example by some of the speakers, and I'll just build on that and shorten my intervention by some paragraphs. What Germany has done is repatriated women and children, more than 100, and in 7 operations, very much assisted by the United States and other nations. What we've come across as a problem is that the SDF does not allow the repatriation of children without their mothers, at least as that is our knowledge. And many mothers, not so many of German origin remaining, but some, fear repatriation in light of the fact that they might be put on trial for what they've done while in Syria and working and living in the IS. So is there any experience by other countries here that would give us hope that we may be able to repatriate those children whose mothers do not want to be repatriated? Germany is at this point in time not repatriating foreign terrorist fighters of German origin or German affiliation. We have heard that the Autonomous Authority of Northern and Eastern Syria is interested, looking into the possibility of prosecuting there by themselves. I have heard the different opinions on that from the panel today. Very interesting and very worthwhile thinking about. I think at some point the international community may have to look in how to support trials in the region on foreign terrorist fighters. Last point, Germany is prosecuting terrorists, IS members in Germany under the International Criminal Code. And we are very reliant on IIIM as well as UNITAD information in order to do so. It is very difficult, but it is possible. So there are ways of doing this once foreign terrorist fighters have been repatriated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General, for your intervention. Now I'd like to give the floor to the EU Counterterrorism Coordinator, followed by the representative of Maldives.
Thank you so much. And first of all, many thanks for convening this very, very important meeting. It's definitely clear that, the situation in Northeast Syria, the camps and the prisons have been on top of my agenda as the EU's counterterrorism coordinator. On just one of the key issues is, of course, that currently the EU's, I would say the main focus is the urgent need really to alleviate the situation in the camps, and more specifically in the Al-Hol camp. I do believe that only through the, let's say, very significant and continued reduction of the residents in Al-Hol, especially, would the authorities have any chance to enhance the security situation as well as the humanitarian conditions. And actually, during the travels that I have done with the colleagues from the EU to the region, we are actually quite committed, that sure that actually one of the main ways forward would be to support, especially the Iraqi government, to bring back the Iraqi citizens as they basically have, as was mentioned, basically half of the women and children, but also the men in the region are actually Iraqis, and doing that would definitely have I would say, a relatively quick response to some of the challenges that we see. What have we done on the EU level then to support the activities? We did carry out the field study in the end of last year, early this year actually, and we came up with, let's say, 3 concrete proposals what the EU and the member states could do. I mean, none of these are new to any one of you, but basically the first thing is, of course, the screening and the registration process in Al-Hol especially, and how to speed up that. Secondly, the reception and rehabilitation work in Jeddah camps where the support is needed. And then finally, of course, the reintegration process into the local communities. And this is now something that we have discussed with the EU institutions and the member states recently, how to do that. One thing that I would also like to raise is the question of accountability. And indeed, there have been successful prosecutions in many EU returnees in the EU member states as well, but we would definitely need a mechanism where the, let's call it, the battlefield evidence or information would be needed to carry this out, and that might also be a decisive issue if and when we face the situation where the FTFs or the men might be returning also to the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. I'd now like to give the floor to the representative of Maldives. There you are. Sorry. Go ahead. Followed by the representative of France.
Thank you very much. I am Hala Hamid, Secretary Bilateral at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maldives. Excellencies, let me briefly touch on some undertakings by the government of Maldives on the safe return of displaced Maldivian nationals in Syria. This is a pledge of President Ibrahim Mohamed Saleh, and this commitment was publicly announced in 2019. And while COVID-19 pandemic proved to be an impediment, it did not dampen our resolve. We are a very small country, and our efforts are also relatively of small scale. As such, we successfully repatriated 1 family of 5, a mother and 4 children, in March last year. And this year in May, the family has been successfully reintegrated into their island community. This was a very challenging task. It was our first repatriation. And on the brighter side, based on this experience, we have strengthened our resolve and it's okay. And our processes and procedures are now improved. Excellencies, the government is aware that there are Maldivian nationals, mostly women and children again, in the Al Hol and Al Roj refugee camps in northeast Syria. We are currently in discussion with our partners, including United States government, with a view towards their repatriation back to the Maldives as soon as possible. And we are grateful for their invaluable assistance. This exercise of repatriation is nonetheless met with a set of challenges that requires assistance from international partners for a successful mission. This includes logistical support, such as intelligence gathering, as well as capacity building for stakeholders. Further challenges also remain in the rehabilitation and reintegration phases. In February 2020, we established the National Reintegration Center in the island of Himoshi, which is a short distance away from the capital city, with rehabilitation programs designed to cater to the physical and emotional well-being of each individual. Children are introduced to mainstream schooling system following an assessment of their mental and physical well-being and receive necessary support while they remain at the NRC. Yet, the lack of adequate skilled personnel, including social workers, psychosocial support, and psychiatrists remain a challenge. This capacity constraint is also present acutely in the reintegration process. And we have further identified that a strong communication strategy is required to address the existing social stigma associated with returnees from Syria. Excellencies, we are very committed in this exercise of repatriation, and we remain committed.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And now I'd like to give the floor to France for the final. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Well, in the interest of time, I will confine my remarks to two very brief points. First, well, the first point being that I really commend and thank you for organizing this very interesting and important event in which we heard a lot of interesting things and learned a lot. I'd like to make 2 points, basically, as regards France's attitude. First, when we make a great effort into providing support for stabilization in northeast Syria. It's a main focus of financial effort to provide stabilization and facilities to the camps themselves. As we mentioned, the conditions are not good, so that's an important thing to bear in mind. Second, as regards repatriation, we now have a track record of having a fairly substantive number of repatriations. There's 169 children and 47 mothers who accepted, who were willing to come. One thing has to be borne in mind. These operations are highly complex, risky in areas where we do not have jurisdiction. And of course, in this connection, there is no international legal obligation for us to repatriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much to France. I'm afraid we have some severe time constraints. We have to vacate the room in a few minutes, but for a brief remark, sir?
Steve, thank you very much. Steve Wine, psychiatrist, University of Illinois. I've seen firsthand the great work being done in Kosovo. Appreciate the State Department's support for work capacity building in Kazakhstan. So I'm a believer, I know this can be done, but I would suggest amending the narrative, which I completely agree with in one respect, and which is that not all returnees, not all child returnees will be the same. And one of the basic truths of science-based truths of our work is that the mental health and psychosocial behavioral consequences are proportional to the intensity and scope and length and developmental breadth of the injury. And the injury here is profound. And so there may be some excellent students to be in that group, but we can predict that the burden that they will place upon countries is going to be much higher than before. So my question would be, what are governments, intergovernmental agencies, and receiving governments going to do to prepare for meeting that high burden so that the kids don't end up in very restrictive and inhumane conditions in the return countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have time for additional interventions from the floor, But on the agenda, we have a question from the delegation of Turkey, and we have a question from you, sir. So I'd like to offer the floor to Deputy Coordinator Moss at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So just really quickly in response to the question from our colleague from Turkey, absolutely. The situation and the dynamics on the ground in Northeast Syria are very, very complex. The number one thing that we can do to facilitate the return to communities of origin of Syrians is to stabilize those communities so that they have something meaningful to which they can return. I will note that just a week and a half ago, there was a State Department and USAID joint program that facilitated the return of approximately 300 Syrians to Raqqa. That was a proof of concept. We are redoubling our efforts with respect to helping to facilitate the return of Syrians to their communities of origin. And to our German colleague, I would say, look, we all have to ask ourselves some really, really hard questions. There are circumstances, there are facts attendant to certain families and children where, for example, they may not want to come home, or a parent may not want to come home. It is the United States position in practice and in policy that consent is paramount, full stop. And then secondly, there are also circumstances where an individual may have a sibling who may not be a national of the receiving government. Governments have to ask themselves one question, and that is it in the best interest of that child to leave their sibling? I would say clearly the answer is no. That's certainly the case for the United States government. I can tell you and everyone here right now, we are grappling with that or answering that same question, and we are working to make sure that we keep families intact, even in circumstances where one of the siblings is not a national of our governments. And to Steve's comment, we wholeheartily agree. We absolutely will continue to support your efforts and to facilitate the communication of your expertise and your partners' expertise to these countries with whom we're working.
Thank you so much, Ian. And given the time constraints, it just remains for me to thank you very much for participating in this event. We know it's a busy week. On behalf of everyone from the U.S. Department of State and the IIJ, as well as I think the speakers and everyone who participated, let me thank you and thank them for their efforts. We're going to have to vacate the room now, so if I could kindly ask you to move into the hallway.